Alright guys, let's get to the point. The dungeon race is tomorrow for Sundered Doctrine, and I just wanted to do a build video before that showing what I'm going to take into the dungeon depending on what character I'm going to play. Mostly, I'm going to probably play Hunter and Warlock, but I will mention Titan in this as well. The background footage is going to be, well, just that. Either some background footage or me literally just going over loadouts, so don't expect any crazy gameplay in the background or anything like that. So that being said, let's just get into it. With characters, I'm going to start with Titan because this is the most simplistic. So for Titan, I only have really two builds that I'm going to worry about. The first build is going to be just straight up Consecration Titan. Ignore the weapons, they're not like set in stone or anything. So the plan is pretty simple. Consecration Titan is still really good. It did not get nerfed into the ground like everybody, well, not everybody, some people think that it did. The only change that I might do, depending on what actually happens in the dungeon, is I might swap out Inmost and Synthos in my class item for Assassin and Synthos, just because of survivability reasons. You never know what they're going to do. Throw a Monkey Wrench in there where, I don't know, lightning strikes just follow you everywhere you go, you know, something like that. Aside from that, the weapons I'm just going to talk about at the end when I get to the third character, and they're pretty much universal for all characters going into this dungeon. So for now, just ignore what the weapons are on the screen here. The other loadout is going to be the DPS loadout, which is going to be Curious of the Falling Star. Same thing, Prismatic Titan, similar to Consecration Titan. The only difference is we're going to be using Thunder Crash with Facet of Courage, and using Curious of the Falling Star as our exotic armor piece. So instead of having the class item, you switch to Curious to do some giga damage from your T-Crash, and then go into weapon DPS from there. And for the build screen, this is pretty much the same between the Consecration build and the T-Crash build. So we have Glacial Nade to get Darkness Energy and also put a Darkness debuff on any boss that we throw it at, which would proc our Facet of Courage, basically making our T-Crash even stronger. We have Dawn for additional Radiant buff in case we're not in a well. We have to run around, like similar to the Corrupted Puppeteer, where once your well is gone, you got to run away from the lightning. We have Facet of Balance, just to get our melees back. Even when we're on Curious, we can still use Consecration Slam to get a lot of super energy off of killing random yellow bars. So like the Puppet had the clones that you can just one bang with a Consecration Slam. This could help you get a second T-Crash back just from spamming Facet of Balance with Consecration. For the melee, we of course have Frenzy Blade because we want to have 3 melee slots, and then it also does Sever to reduce damage. And then we have Facet of Protection, also to reduce damage when we're surrounded. The other ones are, like Purpose, are just kind of a toss-up. You can put whatever you want in the slot, not really too important. Now, for mods, I do want to mention that for your arms, you're going to want to run Triple Heavy-Handed. I don't have them here because I had the Artifact mod from last season slotted in here. But ideally, I would have something like this, and then put a random mod in there. This helps you get back to your T-Crash fast, as I just mentioned. And same thing for your helmet. You're going to want to have some combination of Hands-On and then maybe Font of Wisdom. 2 copies and Font, or maybe 3 copies of Hands-On. Whatever you're more comfortable with. Maybe you want to throw in like Heavy Ammo Finder as well, like this too. And your Surgers, of course, are going to depend on which weapons you are using. So I, last season, was using Arc Weapon Surge, but depending on what I do in this dungeon, which actually will probably still be Arc with Queensbreaker, it'll probably just stick to Arc Weapon Surge. Also, you want to have a separate pair of boots that is something like this, where it doesn't have any armor surge in it. That's because you can slot in a copy of Special Finisher, like so, and then you can collect armor charges and keep them live the entire time until you get to a damage phase, and then right before the boss damage phase starts, you go like so, your surges turn on, and then the clock starts running, instead of previously where you pick up an orb, the clock immediately runs. As long as you don't have an armor surge on, and you have Special Finny on, it won't run out the armor timer. Next up is Warlock. So the first build I'm going to talk about is Speaker Sight, because this is just like the default build you should go into the dungeon with if you're a Warlock. Just full-on support. You want to heal your teammates with turrets, your well, standard healing grenades, Phoenix Dive, whatever you can. Your job is to just full-on heal the whole time. And as for some weapons I'll be using in this build, so obviously, ignore the sword. That's not going to happen. I have a Rocket Sidearm here for additional healing with Heal Clip with a Baron Action. And then in the top slot, I do have a Trace Rifle specifically because in the event where we're done with the damage phase and we're very low on ammo, I can do a quick hot swap with Cenotaph, Dent Head Mask. And then I can shoot any yellow bar with my Trace Rifle and then mark them so my teams can kill them and they get some heavy ammo. Additionally, I can also swap it out for this, not necessarily to mark targets, but because Agriceptor is just great crowd control, and I can also utilize Dentent with it, so I can do a little bit of a 2-for-1, if you will. Next is Lightning Surge. So this is a build of Arc Prismatic Warlock utilizing, well, Lightning Surge. This got several buffs going into this episode, and I think it's actually very, very powerful. I'm talking Consecration levels of powerful, and I think a lot of people are just really underrating it right now. But the idea is simple. We just go into battle with 3 melees because of Arcane Needle. We want to proc Lightning Surge as much as we can. Anytime we use anything with our abilities and get an ability kill, we will also proc Devour for instant healing. So this is typically going to be for neutral game combat. Let's say like in between boss fights, or maybe the first encounter is just going to be like objective based only. This is where this build really shines. In my fragments, I have protection. Same as always, you just want to have protection when you're surrounded. We have balance to try to get more melees back as fast as we can. We have Facet of Dominance because we have a Void Grenade, which means it'll be a weakened grenade. We have Facet of Dawn, which will proc every single time that we do a Lightning Surge on a group of enemies, and then they die. And then lastly, we have Facet of Awakening, although you could probably swap this out for something else. But if you get rapid defeats with light and dark damage or super final blows, you get an elemental pickup, which in this case would turn into an Ionic Trace. Also, for the exotic class item, I personally have Necrotic and Synthos, but you can also use Immol's Light and Synthos. That's probably the most popular one, or even Assassin plus Synthos. That way, when Synthos procs and you kill a bunch of stuff, you also go Invis and plan your next attack accordingly. Lastly, the third Warlock build I want to mention is Sanguine Alchemy build, pretty much. Anytime you go into a boss damage phase and you can be prepped with this, it's going to do massive damage no matter what you are using. The trick is simple. You play as a Well of Radiance Warlock, you go into damage phase, you pop your Well, and then depending on your heavy, you switch to Prismatic, insert flavor here. For example, if I'm using Queensbreaker's Bow, I simply go from my Well to Prismatic Arc, and now my Queensbreaker Bow is going to do bonus damage because we're going to mark the target with a Darkness ability, whether it's a melee, a grenade, or even just Chill Clip from a weapon. It'll proc Facet of Courage because Well turns all your weapon damage into ability damage, so Courage happens to work with your Well. So your Arc, Solar, and Void abilities, aka all your weapons because of Well, will gain an increased damage buff due to the target being afflicted with a Darkness debuff. And there's one more alternate version to this, so instead of slotting in a heavy weapon into your DPS, we're actually going to be utilizing Euphony, because the Euphony is just cracked this season. I'll get to a video on that eventually, but the idea is, again, you pop Well of Radiance, and then go to Prismatic, but instead of going Arc, this time we feed into Strand. That way, Euphony will get a damage buff through Facet of Courage, and it'll crank out a ton of damage for you. And as a little backup plan, I also have Wicked Sister equipped with Embe's Arsenal and Cascade Point. So when I hit something with Euphony, thanks to it being a 3-burst linear, as soon as I hit that target one time with precision hits, it'll proc Cascade Points. So I can quickly swap to Wicked Sister, get off 6 GL shots with Cascade Point, and then go right back to Euphony for more damage. Alright, so finally we're on Hunter. Let me go over all the weapons first. This is what I plan to take into the Day 1 race for a variety of reasons. I have a Tanasha's Mastery sidearm, specifically because of Chill Clip, which applies to putting a Darkness debuff on a boss for Facet of Courage, no matter what you're using. This is a free proc for that Darkness debuff. Additionally, I also have Supremacy in there for a Kinetic Sniper in the event that I may need it. I have Scatter Signal in here for Slice, that being damage reduction on whatever enemy you hit, so they do less damage to you. As a, emergency backup, I decided to throw in Forerunner in here. If we happen to run into a bunch of Tormentors or a Tormentor boss where we need to break limbs, Forerunner is really good at that. Agriceptor is also here, the same reason I explained earlier, for just great crowd control. Outbreak Perfected is here for backup last-second damage. If I use up all my energy and all my heavy damage, I still have Outbreak to put in, and then pump some super energy into me, hopefully getting my Nighthawk back. In our energy slot, Lord of Woes is just getting disabled, so we're not going to talk about that. It actually got disabled while I was recording this. We have Choir of 1. Choir is just disgusting. It was great the moment it came out, and it's been great ever since. And this season, it's even better with all the stuff with destabilizing rounds and weakening bursts and all that. And its ADS mode and its weapon mode are both good for damage, so you can do either close range or ranged damage depending on the boss. It's just fantastic overall. I recommend everybody bring this with you. Another thing I'm bringing in is Vex Mythoclast. In this episode, we have Particle Reconstruction, which not only buffs linear fusions, but also regular fusion rifles, and Vex Mythoclast is a part of that. So Vex, ideally, if you use it on a bunch of red bars, charge it up to get the big bursts out, and then you run into, let's say, a yellow bar, it'll still do really good damage. It won't do one-shot insta-kill on a champion damage, but I think it'll still be really solid. Still Hunt, I think, I don't need to explain why this is on a Hunter, pretty self-explanatory. Nighthawk, Still Hunt, bang bang. I have a couple of hand cannons in here because hand cannons are good for day one content in terms of just killing red bar enemies. Plus, you know, we have explosive payload here. We have destabilizing and explosive payload on Ancient Gospel here. I think it's pretty safe to put these as your primaries. I have Psycho Pump here just for the added benefit of having an Aerodynal GL that can auto-reload itself. It could help me get some light energy by just spamming it onto a boss for my prismatic meter. So, you know, I thought, why not? And then I also have a Rocket Sidearm for kind of the same reason here. It gives me some good chunky light damage for my prism meter. It also can take out crowds because I can get Bull Shot to proc and just kill a bunch of red bar enemies if I need to. Lastly, there's the heavy slot. So the Slammer is here specifically just because of movement tech, utilizing Eager's Edge plus Shatter Skating if I need to traverse areas and I know I have, you know, a plan to go from point A to point B and I can just Shatter Skate straight to there. That's kind of why this is here, for just transition situations. We have Retrofit Escapade just as our LMG cleanup machine with all the versatility in the artifact with volatile rounds and weakening this season. And Retrofit is also just extremely solid on Hunters. I'll show one of the builds with this in a second here. Whisper the Worm, one of the best damage overtime weapons in the game, especially if it's a really long damage phase. Witness, Oryx, Kurt the Puppeteer, things like that. It's just extremely solid. I also have a Grand Overture in here for similar reasons, but for different types of bosses. This is specifically for something like Puppeteer, where Grand Overture can just shine with damage over time, where you get multiple 20-shot volleys off in a single damage phase. Rapid fire now. Alright, Anarchy. This is here for passive damage. If you go into a situation where it's like the Puppeteer, where you can stick the boss and then run around, running away from, you know, lightning strikes or whatever different element is in the new dungeon. Maybe you have to kill some clones because there's a bunch of yellow bars surrounding the boss, things like that. So Anarchy is just good for that kind of passive damage. Parasite is here if we run into a boss that's similar to Vesper's Host, the first boss, Rainix, where you need some good splash damage to get through that health bar instead of traditional weapons. So it would be like Parasite plus Blade Barrage, Parasite plus Behemoth, etc. After that, Bittersweet, I think is pretty standard. It's just a good GL to have on you to go through a rotation with like a good energy weapon with Bittersweet. So let's say Choir and Bittersweet. Or you want to match Surges, you have an arc-based weapon here, and then Bittersweet and a different weapon here just going through ME's arsenal. Although I don't think GLs are going to be all that good because they got a nerf going into this episode, so keep that in mind. After that, we have good old Queensbreaker's Bow. I think this is going to be probably the best weapon going into this dungeon. Oh, actually, it's Queenbreaker now, not Queenbreaker's Bow, my mistake. But unless the boss or bosses in this dungeon are just tiny, microscopic, like scions or wizards that are just flying around and have an impossible crit, Queensbreaker is probably going to win as best heavy weapon slot by a landslide. And even if those bosses do exist, there's always Divinity to give you easy crits. So, you know, utilize this if you have it. Also, highly recommend you get the Catalyst because that will give you rewind rounds to proc on your weapon, making this weapon significantly better overall. Okay, now let's go over the builds. So first up is the best neutral game build that Hunters have, which is utilizing the class item with Spirit of Caliban and Spirit of Liar's Handshake just to plow through any neutral game situation where there's red bars, orange bars, some normal yellow bars. You just punch them all to death. This is what I have set up as the kit. I have two versions of this. I have one with Golden Gun because in the event of where it's a setup of doing crowd control and then starting a boss damage phase, I can just hot swap between this straight into Nighthawk without losing my super, and then, you know, pop my Goldie and go into damage. The other version is going to be with Tether. Pretty self-explanatory. You just anchor down all the adds and then punch them in the face until they're dead. For the abilities, we have Facet of Courage, again, for our ability damage with swapping to Nighthawk, if that happens to happen. Protection for, well, protection. Facet of Command, if we get into a DPS phase where I can proc my Prismatic Grenade, which will then proc a Freeze, which will then proc a Reload on whatever weapons I'm using. Facet of Dawn, for when I throw my Smoke, I'm going to weaken the boss with my Smoke, and I'm also going to proc Radiant in the event that our well ran out, and I needed a new buff through Radiant. And then lastly, we have Facet of Ruin for when I freeze/ignite an enemy to do bonus damage or an increased radius. Alright, neutral game build number 2. This one is going to be a bit more range-based. This is going to be on Night Stalker, utilizing the old setup of Vanishing Step and Stylish Executioner to consistently go invis over and over and over, and then abusing all the juicy artifact mods that are surrounded between volatile rounds and weakening and all of that, and rocking Retrofit Escapade that I mentioned earlier with Gyrfalcons. This basically gives me an infinite loop where I will proc Volatile, Weaken, and Devour non-stop continuously for the rest of my life, so as long as I am able to go invis. And between having my dodge give me invisibility, and then having any ability kill also put me back into invisibility, all I have to do is just initially go invis, kill a single target with my volatile rounds, which instantly proc the moment I go invis, then True Sight will proc, and then make me invis again after the next target is dead after that with Stylish. So it's just an infinite loop. It's perfect for range combat for this season, in my opinion. Also, here are the fragments. Sorry, it's like 4 AM. I'm trying to just juggle everything. We have Echo of Starvation to proc Devour when we pick up orbs. We have Echo of Undermining to give us Weaken on our grenades. We have Echo of Persistence to give us bonus timer on our invisibility and also Devour. And then lastly, Echo of Reprisal, final blows when surrounded by combatants, just to get back to our tether faster. Lastly, we have the DPS setup. This is, of course, going to utilize Celestial Nighthawk Golden Gun, the best damage setup with a super that Hunter's Death currently in the game, still. And then we're going to try to utilize the Queensbreaker setup, assuming that the bosses allow us to do this. And this way we can pump out the maximum amount of damage that we can with the most busted heavy in the game that we currently have. At least, again, in my opinion. So with that in mind, the setup with this is going to be similar to the Caliban's and Lyra's Handshake setup, except we're going to be rocking Snare Bomb instead of Combination Blow. This specifically is really helpful for this build, assuming you're running a linear in a heavy slot, because, if you didn't know, Particle Reconstruction gets canceled out if you're running Tether or Tractor Cannon, but it does not if you're running a standard 15% weaken, so our Snare Bomb or Divinity or any other 15% weaken in the game. If you do it this way, Particle will stack with everything else you're doing in damage, Well of Radiance, Armor Surges, etc. The final thing to note here is going to be the dodge. Now, if you're on the Nighthawk version that I'm talking about now, you definitely want to have Marksman's Dodge on to dodge and reload your heavy weapon when you run out, or should you run out. However, if you're on the Caliban's version and you're on at clear mode, you want to have your dodge be Gambler's Dodge, so you can get your melee back every single time that you get a combination blow kill, and you keep your chain at X3 going over and over to kill everything in the room. And that is what I'm going to be bringing into the Day 1 race for Sundered Doctrine on each character. Hopefully, this has made sense, and it wasn't just a mess all over the place. I tried to cram in all the information in a reasonable amount of time instead of making this like a 1-hour video. So if something didn't make sense, feel free to ask in the comments below, and I'll try to answer it before the dungeon begins. In the meantime, if you want to get some juicy emblems from Bungie for just watching the dungeon race, I will be streaming it at least on Twitch, maybe also on YouTube. The social links for that will be in the comments below. Aside from that, if you did enjoy the video or it helped you, please consider subscribing today. It does help the channel grow and is much appreciated. If you want to go the extra mile, you can leave a like and or a comment below as well. If you don't know what to leave as a comment, you can leave Queensbreaker as the comment. Thanks for watching. Catch you next time.